The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents Lot's Wife. So when I was a kid and I was attending Sunday school and children's church, I remember hearing Bible stories. And of course we heard about Noah and the ark and all the animals. We had sang songs about Father Abraham and all of these others, ancient Israelites. And we heard some of the stories about what the Bible had to say about what happened. I don't recall hearing much about Job other than God essentially put Job through the ringer and Job kept loving God. That's all I remember. That's the nutshell version of what we were taught then. I remember more now, having studied it, but I'm trying to look back at how I looked at this when I was a kid. And one interesting story for me was the story of Lot's family. And I'm going to paraphrase it, but I'm also going to put the text from the Authorized King James Version up on the screen along with it so that you can read along and, you know, say, oh, Matt's making stuff up, because Matt's not actually making stuff up. And so we're going to start actually a chapter before we get into Lot, because this is the lead up. And you can start earlier in this, where before Abraham's name was changed from Abram to Abraham, he and Lot were buddies, like brothers, and they kind of went their separate ways, and Lot ends up settling in Sodom. And so there's a weird thing here at the beginning of chapter 18 where Abraham is sitting out in the tent door and it says the Lord appears to him. But what it says is Abraham lifts up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door and bowed himself to the ground and said, my Lord, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant. I don't know for sure if it's fair to call these angels, only because I don't know that that concept truly existed in ancient Hebrew or amongst the founders here. I don't know when that word or that version of heavenly beings came into play, but that's what the story is. It's not that God himself appeared to Abraham. It's that God sent 3 men, it says, but we'll call them angels just because that's the tradition within the church. If you don't think they were angels, fine. I don't think they were angels either, but I don't think any of this happened. What ends up happening is that the first weird thing, and I mentioned it's weird, is because Abraham immediately goes to the tent and tells Sarah, hey, get busy cooking, you know, essentially start grinding up some meal to make grain and you know, make some bread for people. Now, I don't know how long it takes to, he literally says, hastened to the tent to Sarah and said, make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it and make cakes upon the hearth. So there's no bread cooked. She's going to make bread from scratch. Now, that's going to take a little while. And he goes out into the field and he gets a calf, and he has one of his young men, a young servant in his employ or slave, and gives him the calf and has him go and dress it. And then eventually he takes butter, milk, and the calf that he dressed, and he puts it before the men so that they can eat it. Now, unless they're eating like raw cow, there was some period of time to butcher it and eat it, butcher it and cook it so that they could eat it. And it strikes me as funny because all of this stuff takes time, and yet it's written in like just a few verses there. And then they are having a conversation, and immediately they're like, where is Sarah? And they're like, oh, Sarah's over in the tent. Well, no, hours and hours have taken place. Maybe Sarah's been in there busy making bread. But they come along and they say, hey, God sent us here to let you know we're going to let Sarah conceive a child. And of course, Sarah laughs. And they, why is Sarah laughing in the tent? Sarah lies and says, I wasn't laughing in the tent. And they're like, oh, yeah, you did. And then they rise up and they look towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to bring them that way. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I know him, that he will command his children. Basically, God is saying, I don't want to tell you what I'm getting ready to do. I'm not quite sure if I should, because I know that you're good and you're going to raise up your children according to me. But what's going on down in Sodom and Gomorrah is so awful that I need to go down there and look and make sure it's going on. Now, that's weird to me. Why would God need to go down and look and make sure what's going on? Why would he need to send angels to investigate? Doesn't God know everything? Isn't God everywhere? And even as a kid, that stuck out to me as something strange. Why would God need to go and see? Now, the apologetics that I was given at the time is that God doesn't need to go see. He already knows what's going there. All of this is a little wordplay with Abraham to let him know what's going to happen and make him feel important. The same thing happens with essentially the binding of Isaac, which I've talked about before, where, you know, God tells Abraham to do something that's supposedly against God's nature. But Abraham seeks out and strikes a deal with them, and it's like, you know, well, are you going to kill the righteous in Sodom along with the unrighteous? And they start working. Well, what if there's 50 righteous and 40 righteous, et cetera? And go on, oh, if there's 30 there, I won't kill him if there's 20. If 10 are there that are righteous, I will not destroy it for 10's sake. And then they went off. So Abraham basically bartered with God or God's representatives to say, hey, how many people would have to be good in this town for you to not destroy it? And the nuts and bolts of it is that he agrees not to destroy it if there's 10. The next part is chapter 19. And there's a lot to get to here, way more than people normally expect. If you actually read this short chapter on what happens with Lot, it's full of really bizarre things. And there's one that stuck in my head that I want to bring up, which is why I'm doing the video. So the two angels came to Sodom at even. Now, here the word angels is used. In the previous chapter, men are used. And in Abraham's case, there were 3 men, and now there are 2 angels. And who knows how these connect, but we're really not doing good with numbers. Maybe we'll get better when we get to the book name numbers, but in Genesis, we keep getting numbers messed up. So they came to and Lot was at the gate at Sodom, and Lot saw them, rose up and met them. And he said, behold, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house and tarry all night and wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early and go on your ways. And they said, nay, but we will abide in the street all night. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned into him and entered his house. So the paraphrase is that these 2 angels show up. Lot immediately recognizes that they're angels or significant or whatever, and says, oh my gosh, don't stay out in the street. Come in here, stay in my house tonight. And they go in his house. And we'll get to verse 4. Before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot and said, where are the men which came into thee this night? Bring them out to us so that we may know them. Now, this is a little bit of fun with language, because you can read this to your kids, and it sounds like they just want to know them. But I don't think it's going to be a shock to anybody, Christian or otherwise, that what they're saying is, we want to have sex with the men that just showed up in your house. And there's a number of reasons why we know that this is actually the case. But Lot went to the door and shut it and said, please don't do that. That would be wicked. Because there's nothing wicked about getting to know 2 strangers that showed up in your town. There may be something wicked about wanting to sexually assault the 2 strangers that showed up in your town. And so in verse 6 and 7, Lot's saying to the town, don't be so wicked. And then in verse 8, immediately, get this, really let this resonate. 2 angels show up. Lot convinces them to hide in his house and have dinner with him and stay with him. The people are in the town, surround Lot's house, wanting to have sex with these 2 men. Evidently, angels are so hot that an entire town is just going to immediately want to sexually assault these angels. Lot, without missing a beat, in verse 7, he tells the town, essentially, don't do this wicked thing that you want to do. And in verse 8, he says, behold now, I have 2 daughters which have not known man. Let me, I pray, bring them out to you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. Hey, I don't want you to sexually assault my angel visitors, so take my 2 virgin daughters and do whatever you want with them. I don't know why this isn't talked about more. I know people have heard it, but it's like, hey, you can rape my daughters instead of raping the angels that showed up. And they said, stand back. And then they said it again. This one fellow came in to sojourn. He needs to be a judge. Now we'll do worse with you than with them. And they pressured the man and Lot and came near to break the door. But the men put forth their hand and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. So now we're alternating between men and angel in the Authorized King James Version. and they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness. So these angels, who can protect themselves and blind people and who are going to destroy the village, Lot just wants to protect them and offers up his young virgin daughters to the crowd. And because of Lot's righteousness, the men, we're looking at verse 12 here, son-in-law and thy sons and thy daughters and whosoever hast in the city, bring them out in this place, for we're going to destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxen great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord hath sent us to destroy it. So now we have these representatives of God saying, we're going to mess this town up. Lot went out, spoke to his son-in-law, which married his daughters, and he said, up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his son-in-law. Basically, they didn't believe him. Lot goes out and says, hey, you guys who married my other daughters, you need to leave because this place is going to be destroyed. And they're like, same as they did with Noah. Oh, you're so silly building a boat. It's always these skeptics that end up being doing the mocking and then paying for it in the Bible. So when the morning rose, the angels hastened Lot, saying, arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters which are here, lest they be consumed by the iniquity of the city. And while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought him forth and set him without the city. So they literally just grabbed them all and moved them outside of the city. And it came to pass when they brought them forward, and he said, escape for thy life. Look not behind thee, neither stay thou in the plain. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. And Lot said to them, oh, no, my Lord. Behold, now the servant hath found grace in his sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast shown me by saving my life. And I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me, and I die. Behold now, this city is near to flee into, and it is a little one. Let me escape thither, and my soul shall live. And he said to him, see, I have accepted thee concerning this also, that I will not overthrow this city for which thou hast spoken. Haste thee, accept hither, for I cannot do anything until thou become thither. I love the Authorized King James Version. But it's basically, get your ass out of here. We need to get started tearing this town up, and you can head off towards Zoar. So the sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar, and then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the city and that which grew up on the ground. So he took out Sodom and Gomorrah and that whole plain. And then we get to verse 26. In verse 26, it says, but his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord, and he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the plain, and behold, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. Now you're like, wow, man, I've been sitting here listening to you read the Bible poorly for quite a little while, and that's fair. The nuts and bolts of this story is that God ushers them out, tells them not to look back. Lot's wife looks back, and she is turned into a pillar of salt. Why? It reminds me of the passage in the Bible where God says, I want you to wipe the Amalekites off the face of the earth so that there is no memory of them. And then they write it down in the Bible, so there is a memory of them. That's how ridiculous this is. I'm going to destroy these places. You're going to be able to look at them tomorrow morning, but if you look at them now while it's going on, which you would think would be a good thing, burn this into your mind. This is what God does to people who are unrighteous. Burn this in your mind. But no, there's some sort of weird, arbitrary, I'm going to make a really strange rule that if you look at the town that I've rescued you from, while it's, being raised, you're going to turn to a pillar of salt. And why a pillar of salt? And by the way, how did we verify that she was a pillar of salt? And who noticed? It's so strange because she couldn't have been in front of Lot because it says she was behind him. His wife looked back from behind him and she became a pillar of salt. Now it's possible it was Lot and then Lot's wife and then his daughters, and the wife turned around, turned her pillar of salt, and the daughters kept going. But apart from that, somebody would have to turn around and look at her, unless he just didn't discover it until the next morning. But why a pillar of salt? Why did things like this stop? Once upon a time, when we didn't have technology, when we didn't have cameras, when we didn't have the ability to record events, when we didn't have modern understanding of science in the world, God did all kinds of things. Hey, I'm going to send down a couple of angels. It's going to be obvious to some people that these are representatives of God, and to others, they're just going to be men who are really hot. And then I'm going to destroy this town, and I want everybody to know, I'm going to write it down. Hey, these towns were so wicked, I destroyed them and the whole plain. Sodom, Gomorrah, the whole plain. You made it to Zoar, cool. But don't look during it or I'll turn you to salt. And people just accept that this is what happened. Why doesn't it happen anymore? Why don't we hear about people being turned into pillars of salt now? I mean, it's always struck me as strange. And so I began to look at the story, as did many others, as if it didn't actually happen, but is trying to teach a lesson. And I still don't know the exact relevance of the salt. And for all the people who believe that it happened literally, I don't understand why. But the next part of the story is important. And it's one that a lot of atheists have talked about. And it is, after his wife becomes a pillar of salt, then on at verse 29, it came to pass when God destroyed the cities on the plain that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst to overthrow them when he overthrew the cities in which Lot dwelt. So God is saving Abraham as to honor Abraham's trust in the Lord. And Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains, and his 2 daughters with him, for he feared to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. There's a good reason in the story to fear dwelling in Zoar. It's just funny that he would ask to dwell in that city and then be scared to dwell in that city. And then we get to the part that all the atheists love to quote. The firstborn daughter said unto the younger, hey, our father is old. There's not a man on the earth to come unto us and after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him that we may preserve the seed of our father. Essentially, Lot's 2 virgin daughters, who he just evidently the night before, or maybe a couple nights before, offered up to a crowd as playthings to do whatever they wanted with, now want to get daddy drunk so that he can impregnate them. And they do, and he does. Now, by them pushing this action, it's not a sin on Lot's part. Lot can still be righteous. He was just tricked into becoming drunk by his daughters and then somehow managing to perform despite being so drunk that he didn't realize it was his daughters. Not once, but twice. 2 nights in a row. Both successfully impregnating both of his virgin daughters. And then they gave birth, and to one of them, they named the child Moab, and to the other one, they named the child Ammon. And that is where the Moabites and the Ammonites come from. Now, if you go and you read about modern scholars and what they think of this story, I don't see much where anybody pays any attention to the salt portion of the story about how it was verified or how anybody could have verified it or anything about it at all. Actually, it's just a matter of fact story. But when it comes to the incest, there are people who are constantly trying to justify why this is in here. Was this considered righteous? Well, at no point in this story is it noted that Lot was especially righteous. Yes, he was really kind to the angels, so kind that he offered up his daughters for the crowd to have sex with. But it doesn't say that Lot was righteous. It basically says we saved Lot and his family because that's what Abraham wanted. And Abraham is, this is an Abrahamic religion. Abraham is the founder of Judaism. And instead, the scholars say, look, we think this story was made up so that the authors would have a good story to use as a justification for outlawing and prohibiting incest. That's pretty good. I mean, I have a problem with the scholars that suggest this story was made up in order to justify prohibiting incest, because I think I know exactly why this story was made up. So buckle up, cut the clip out, send it to all the scholars, but this is my thought. First of all, the only reason that Lot's wife was evidently turned to salt was so that they could have an excuse for why the daughters are going to need to be impregnated by their father and why there's not a mother around to prevent or prohibit this. But irrespective of Lot's wife and the turning to a pillar of salt. Maybe it set up a mourning period. The true reason, in my view, for this story is that the Moabites and the Ammonites were disliked by the tribes of Israel. They did not get along. Nope, you can't use our land. Hey, we're going to fight with you. We're going to struggle with you, blah, blah, blah. And so I think this is basically a story that's like a version of the Dozens, where you're talking about somebody's mama. Your mama's so blank that blank, just to be offensive and outrageous towards someone's mama. And so if you look at this, it becomes a story from the standpoint of the children of Abraham, basically saying, those Moabites and those Ammonites, they're the children of incest. That's why they are not desired by us. That's why we can't cooperate with them. They're not Israelites. They're not Hebrews. They're not Jews. They're incest babies. They are a collection of incest babies. Mwah, ha, 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 ha. You couldn't start your family with any other option than to have your daughters get you drunk and have sex with you in order to create, your offspring. Oh, this is so funny. That is why I think the story is in there. I don't think that this was written in any sort of, let's have first of all, I don't think it's true, but it's not let's have a story that allows us to come up with a reason to prohibit incest. Why would you need a reason? I mean, if the God of the Bible can prohibit people from eating shellfish and wearing fabrics of mixed clothing without having any sort of shellfish incident to spawn it, then he doesn't need any reason to say, hey, you shouldn't be doing incest. But also, if you take a look at the actual laws about who can have sex with whom, there are some things that are omitted, including father-daughter. And when I talk to apologists about this, they're just like, well, they didn't need to write that. Everybody knew that. And yet, Lot. Now, I had a lot of fun as I was going through the story because it started with someone saying, hey, when Lot's wife turned to salt, who turned around to verify and why didn't they turn to salt? Was she in front of them? Was she in the middle? Was it verified after the fact? Nothing, because it's just a story. But it's funny to me that the Bible is viewed as the good book, that I was presented as Bible as a child and have some of those still, which I'll be doing a video on here just a few minutes on keepsakes from when I was a Christian. And yet we have a book here where just in 2 short chapters, or basically just one chapter, Genesis 19, angels show up, are threatened with sexual assault by the town. Lot, who is the person in the story we're supposed to have the closest connection with, as far as like, let me put myself in this narrative. Lot offers up his virgin daughters to the crowd instead, but the angels prevent that from happening by blinding people, which means they didn't need any help in the first place. Then they rescue Lot and his wife and his 2 daughters, tell them don't look back, which is a silly rule. Wouldn't you want somebody to look back and go, so they can tell everybody, this is what the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah looked like. This is what God does to those who disobey. This is what being a homosexual is going to this is going to incur the wrath of God. So it's a silly thing, and it doesn't make sense. And then we get to his daughters committing sexual assault on their father in order to have children, the Moabites and Ammonites, who just happen to be the families, the tribes, that the rest of the Israelites don't like. Makes far more sense if somebody said, hey, why don't you like those people? Aren't they related to us? Yeah, but they're incest baby related to us. Mwah, ha, ha, ha. And that's why I think the story exists. What do you think? Post in the comments, hit like and subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.